This is Partners in Crime with Adam Croft and...
Not the other one. Hello, happy Friday. Welcome to another episode of Partners in Crime and another one where Bob's done a bunk. But we do have, of course, the wonderful Adrian Hobart with us again. Hello, Adrian.
Hi, Adam. Thanks so much.
No, that's all right. Thank you for stepping into the breach while Bob goes off and does some real work. We'll stay here and we'll prat around doing this. It's probably easier, isn't it?
I think so.
So you intimated to me before we started recording that you've had quite an interesting week or two.
Yeah, I've been on my travels a little bit. I took advantage of my partner Rebecca going off to flooded Venice for a week. So she was looking at art and wading through with galoshes and things like that. And I thought, well, I'll go round and visit a few old haunts, but also head to Brighton, which is a vital location for, probably quite a few of my books in the future, because it's somewhere I used to work. I did 3 or 4 years there as a BBC reporter, getting into under the skin of the city. And I sort of found myself on Hove Seafront looking for the perfect beach hut in which to have a murder take place. And I think I found it. Number 83. Lovely.
Number 83, I'll bear it in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So that'll now what struck me was just how my mind had played tricks over the years about where Queen Victoria's statue is in Hove, overlooking the seafront, and where the lights are. So that was one of the things I had to go around sort of almost dictating to myself how many paces it was to the steps and how big the grass was and how deep the shingle is and all that sort of stuff, just to make sure I got it right.
But it's fascinating, isn't it? And it's one of the best bits of the job, actually, being able to go out and do these bits of research. And of course, a trip to Brighton is always warmly welcomed, certainly around these parts. And Brighton pops up a lot in crime books, actually. It's home to a number of series, and of course, even going back to the wonderful Graham Greene's Brighton Rock, even back then in the 1940s, it was a wonderful city in which to set crime books. And I know a lot of people have kind of touched on this in various different ways of their own and what makes Brighton sing to them, I guess, as a venue for crime fiction. But there are always these kind of subtle differences I find that people have. And what is it for you, do you think, that makes Brighton so irresistible as a setting for crime?
It's a wonderful mix, excuse me, of grandeur, with all those fabulous Regency squares, and beneath that surface, there's a lot of grime and crime. And certainly I knew that when I was working there. I mean, we had some spectacular crime stories when I was working there. This is the late 90s, and there was a sense that, it's a city where I think that criminals and the more respectable elements rub shoulders quite strongly. And I also felt that in some ways, it was a city at the time which had the cheapest heroin in Europe, and it had
always a good reason to visit.
Yeah, right. But in the sense that things seemed to be got away with there. And then there was also this old school criminality that had come in from the 60s that sort of hung over like a shadow of the place. Many of the figures that I'm thinking of had moved on, but yet that they'd left a sort of legacy and a feeling around the place. So, I think it's one of these places which has great glamour, but also has a grubby side, which just seems to rub together. And then you've got it's such a visceral place with the smells of Brighton are sort of, heightened. With the sea air. So I love it. Absolutely love it.
It's somewhere that I love visiting as well, especially when I want to get my cheap heroin. This week, I have been reading a book. You'll be happy to know I've actually been trying to squeeze some reading time in deliberately, as regular listeners to Partners in Crime will know. I started off this podcast a couple of years ago with Bob talking about books that we'd read, and I very quickly realised I couldn't read a book a week and I wasn't getting anywhere near, so I just started scouring the news for stories instead and let Bob do that bit. But I have been trying to increase my reading, and I've been doing very well with it, and I have finished another book. It was one that I plucked off my bookshelf, actually. I've had it there for a long time. fancied the look of it, so gave it a go. It's a couple of years old now. It's The Other Woman by Laura Wilson. I will read the blurb on the back because that's what we do. It's much easier than actually doing our own work. It says, "He's going to leave you. Let's see how smug you are then." Shortly after Christmas, a message arrives at Sophie's house. Perhaps she should ignore it, but she ignored the last one, and the one before that. Now it's time to take action. But when a simple plan to identify and confront the other woman goes drastically and violently wrong, Sophie must go to extreme lengths to keep her life and her family together, all the while guarding her devastating secrets. I found it really gripping, actually. When I first started reading it, I'll admit I wasn't sure. The characters are what you can get sometimes in psychological thrillers, these kind of stereotypical rich middle class families with big houses and a Porsche and live-in housekeeper, and they've got a boat, and it's stuff that's very hard to actually relate to for the majority of people. But all of these things actually aren't thrown in there gratuitously. They all turn out to be very, very relevant and completely necessary to make the plot work. So I ate humble pie a little way into this book and started to realise what was going on. It's twisty, it's turny, it's got a lot of pace, a lot of narrative action, keeps pulling you along. It's tight, it's well crafted, and I would highly recommend that. And that's The Other Woman by Laura Wilson.
Oh, I'll look that one up.
Yeah, you should. In fact, I think you should look it up on Kobo, Adrian. They do very kindly sponsor this podcast, so we probably should say that. If you head over to kobo.com, find The Other Woman by Laura Wilson, or any book which takes your fancy. I've got a few up there myself. If you've not used Kobo before, enter the promo code CRIME at the checkout, and they'll give you 90% off of your first ebook purchase with them. If you've bought books from them before, you can go through the link in the show notes and use the promo code PARTNERS, and you get 40% off of ebooks for life, which I think is quite nice.
I've done it, and I'm enjoying it.
Good. We were talking as well about sometimes how real life and crime fiction cross over. We're going to tread carefully on this one, but so lots of listeners will be well aware, and we won't go into the details of the Jeffrey Epstein controversies, which have been knocking around for some time now and have been in the news. You can go and do your own research on that because I don't want to get sued by anyone. And recently, our very own Prince Andrew got dragged into that melee and decided, for some unknown reason, a PR person he's shooting, to do a TV interview, didn't he?
Yes, and that's almost as big as mystery as well. I mean, the papers are full of whose idea was it and who suggested that it was a good idea, because it didn't go very well, did it? So an hour, no holds barred interview with Newsnight's Emily Maitlis here on the BBC, which is never an easy thing. Now, within the industry, she's one of the subtler interviewers. She's not somebody who's going to go at you like, some of the others who would ask you a question 15 times, but it's quite beguiling. Well, exactly. Yeah. I mean, she was very clever the way she pitched it. And in a sense, I mean, she played it pretty straight, went through the facts and the timeline, and challenged, the differences in people's stories and that sort of thing. And Prince Andrew came up with his explanations. But it was a fascinating viewing in the sense of the body language, which seemed to sort of switch between, sort of very, very focused listening to the question, and then when answering it, blinking and looking away and all this sort of tells, if you like, that came into it. And then there was, extraordinary lack of detail in some of the answers, but detail about, sort of alibis that was stronger than, I never met so-and-so, I don't recall that. But I was at Pizza Express, Pizza Express in Woking, which is a bizarre thing to remember so many years on. So it is very odd.
So I was going to say, it's very odd remembering clearly that you definitely didn't go to a party that you were clearly photographed at a number of times. But you remember you definitely didn't go there. But you remember going to Pizza Hut in Woking. I mean, I understand the royal family probably don't go to Pizza Hut or Pizza Express or Woking very often. But even so, I think I've probably only been to a Pizza Express once or twice, and I couldn't tell you where or when. One of them was Brighton. I know that much. If we want to bring this full circle, but
Right.
it was it was just a bizarre interview, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I would love to have juxtaposed, let's say you could put a fictional interviewer in, one of the famous detectives of fiction in there. How would they have approached it? So if you replaced Emily Maitlis with Jane Tennison from Prime Suspect, how would that go? I would love to. Or Superintendent Hastings from Line of Duty. That would have been great, but closer to home, if I could bring up, your very own DCI Culverhouse, how would he do it? You're telling me you went to a Pizza Express, Your Royal Highness. Pull the other one. I can't imagine that. You and Beatrice. Oh yeah, very cosy. That wouldn't have worked.
No,
you say,
no. Ladies and gentlemen, the voice of Jack Culverhouse.
Yeah, you say you did it out of honour. Doesn't sound very honourable to me. You spent 3 days in New York with him to tell him that you were going to break off your relationship. Pull the other one. Yeah, it's it's that kind of thing.
You never know the next. Sorry, I guess we keep crossing over. I was going to say that you never know the next interview he does may well be a police one. Who knows?
Yeah, it could well be, and certainly there's pressure mounting in the United States that he should speak to the FBI about things.
Well, we touched on the world of audio there, and of course you do narrate my Night in Culverhouse audiobooks amongst many others. And I spotted an article in the news this week in the Financial Times, of all places, which said it had the headline, "Podcasts bring high production values and sharp writing to audio fiction." Now this is talking about the rise in audio dramas, which are kind of not taking the place of audiobooks, but complementing them very nicely. So not books which are just read out, but which are produced and acted out for audio, much in the same way as The Archers, for example, on the radio, or if you just imagine, I guess, a film that you're watching with your eyes shut. Now these aren't necessarily new. Have been done for a while. Radio drama, of course, has been around for a long, long time. And even on the audiobook side of things, I was involved in the production of one of mine being turned into an audio drama in 2012, top end of 2012, so nearly 8 years ago now. So I was actually ahead of the curve for once, it seems, which, funnily enough, is how I met Mr. Dawes, who played my character Kempson Hardwick in that. But I digress. This article says it used to be that radio drama, with its ridiculous creaking doors and endless exposition, would bring me out in hives, says the author of this. But podcasts with their superior production values and smart writing have transformed what we now call audio fiction, from the early horror-inspired Welcome to Night Vale to recent future fantasy such as Sandra and this year's Blackout. It goes on to talk about the fact that Hollywood actors are getting in on the game. Blackout had Rami Malek in it. David Schwimmer has been in Homecoming, for example. And it goes on to talk about Passenger List, which is one which has been fated, I guess, as one of the next big audio dramas, audio fiction as they're calling it, which apparently is ambitious in sound and brings added excellence in storytelling. It begins at Heathrow Airport, where a young Bulgarian boy is found wandering the corridors. Turns out he's been left by his mother, who got on a flight to New York, which subsequently went missing and is assumed to have crashed. Very interesting premise for a book there. It says much of the dialogue takes place over crackling phone lines, which sounds as though it could be aggravating, but in fact adds to the realism, according to this article. That's one to look out for. Passenger List and Hunted is one which is and Blackout as well. They've all been Hunter and Blackout. They've all been largely congratulated, if that's the right word, by the critics. So audio dramas, I guess, are perhaps the next big thing, mate. Yeah, maybe I got there a bit too early 8 years ago. Maybe I should have hung around a bit longer.
I think this is to some extent driven by people like Audible, who are doing these, full cast versions of things at great expense. And my heart slightly sinks as a sort of I would describe myself as a provincial narrator compared to the sort of people who are now appearing on these things. Oscar winners, as you've mentioned, Rami Malek, but the cream of British drama are now doing these full cast audios. And it used to be the Preserve of the BBC who used to be able to call in on these things. And it's a difficult thing to compete with. But I've been doing a horror book recently, and I have added elements of full production in there. Okay, it's still my voice, but putting in atmospheres and sound effects and reverb to create the echoes needed, when people are screaming and all this sort of stuff, just to add a little bit of, pizzazz. But where do I stop? I mean, I could go the full hog and, hire other people. I've got my stepson involved. He's doing the prologue for it, but it's quite a challenge. But I think that there's still something compelling about a single voice able to do all the characters and take you on that journey through the story. Yeah. It's a real skill, but I can see that, it really does appeal when you do the full cast and, you get a proper mix. It's extraordinary what you can do with sound now.
And it is ambitious. I mean, I remember from 8 years ago that it took a long time. It took us a couple of months to produce this basically feature film length, 1 3/4 hours, I think it was, production. It was also expensive, and trying to get a cast of 11 or 12 people in, around in one place. We had outside recording, out in the streets and in cars and all sorts of things. It's I should get that back out there really now that there is a market for these things, and see what happens with it. But it was really interesting. As I say, that's how Bob and I started working together. Actually, is that we worked on adapting the book and re-scripting that for audio. So you've got him to thank for that one. Pardon me. Also in the news this week, I saw on this outlet called BBC News. Never heard of it, but there was an article with the headline, "Killer claims his life sentence is served because he briefly died." The article says a court in the US has refused to release a convict who argued that he had completed his life sentence when he briefly died. Benjamin Schreiber, who's 66, was sentenced to life without parole in Iowa for bludgeoning a man to death in 1996. He said his sentence ended when his heart stopped during a medical emergency 4 years ago, even though he was revived. But judges said Schreiber's bid, while original, was unpersuasive. They said he was unlikely, in inverted commas, to be dead, as he had signed his own legal documents in the case.
That's fantastic.
Quite, ambitious, I would say. The judges said it was original, but unpersuasive. So,
well, it's one of those things where. Yeah, it feels like the crime is so significant that, I can't be glib about it. But at the same time, I love the originality of it and should get off on that basis alone. But, it was a bludgeoning. So maybe that counts against it.
Well, it would open up a whole can of worms. I mean, as a lot of crime writers and readers will know, especially if you've looked into the forensic side of things, the whole argument about whether and when somebody is dead is an argument that still rages on. You'd think, we are all the medical advancements we've had, and how far we've come in terms of medicine and biology and forensics, but we still can't agree on when somebody's actually dead.
Yes. I mean, that's always in medical dramas. They always have that debate, don't they? Leave them. Yeah, they're dead. No, I think there's still a hope of getting them alive again.
Well, it's such a long process. The dying process is a long one, and it can be hours, if not days. And things are still going on post death. In inverted commas, where we kind of generally tend to accept that death happens, but even before then, for hours and days, from what I've read numerous times, there are. It's quite common for people to be well aware that they're dying and they're in their final days. I remember when my own grandfather died earlier this year. one of my cousins went up to visit him actually on the day he died, and he was, he was sitting up in his chair and all the rest of it, and he said to my cousin, he'd only been there about 20 minutes, and said to my cousin, I think you should go now, and he's really insistent my cousin should go, and he went. And he asked the nurses in the care home if they would wheel him over to the window so that he could have a look outside. So they did so, and came back sort of 15, 20 minutes later, and he had passed. He knew it was happening. He wanted my cousin to go. He wanted to, be looking out the window onto the gardens as he went, and I kind of find peace in that, I think.
Yeah, there's a great deal of it's almost reassurance that you can choose in those circumstances. You can choose the context in which you leave consciousness and leave the world. So, yeah, there is something.
Or at least know it's happening.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I'm dying this morning.
Heavy one last night, was it?
Not so much that I had caring duties into the wee small hours, so that's caught up with me a little bit.
Yes, it does that. Also in the news this week, there was quite a lot in the news this week. Well, in fact, we've got a couple of weeks backed up because we didn't have a show last week. The Guardian ran an article by Nicola Upson, an author, who listed her top 10 Golden Age detective novels. She says in her article, it's no mystery that detective stories flourished in Britain after the First World War. Loss, violence and social change are at the heart of most crime novels, and there's surely no period in our history when all three were experienced more deeply. But it took the Second World War and its aftermath to bring them to maturity. Many of the authors whose careers began 20 years earlier wrote their best books in the 1940s and 1950s. I think that's obviously none truer than with Agatha Christie, whose career definitely peaked in the middle. She then goes on to mention that that inspired her to write books that honour the Golden Age. And we mentioned my Kempson Hardwick series earlier as well. I've done the same. I've been very much inspired to write these kind of pastiches, tongue-in-cheek ones of the Golden Age. Anyway, her list that she lists is first of all, of course, And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie, a book from 1939, an absolute classic. Green for Danger by Christiana Brand from 1944. To Love and Be Wise by Josephine Tay from 1950. An English Murder by Cyril Hare, 1951. The Tiger and the Smoke by Marjorie Allingham a year later. The Killings at Badger's Drift by Caroline Graham, which was from 1987, is still kind of golden age, certainly. And, of course, then went on to spawn Midsummer Murders, which is now known the world over. Another golden age style book, but from 2001, from the great P.D. James, Death in Holy Orders. The Act of Roger Murgatroyd by Gilbert Adair in 2006, who I guess kind of pastiches the Agatha Christie books. He's had previous books called, following books called A Mysterious Affair of Style and Then There Was No One. A celebration and parody of the Golden Age, it's called here, which does sound ideal. Magpie Murders by Anthony Horowitz, 2016, and more recently The Truants by Kate Weinberg. The Golden Age is still alive and well. Many of those books, well past the Golden Age, and not even by traditional Golden Age writers. But this goes to show that sometimes good things never die. And Nicola Upson's new book, Sorry for the Dead, is out now, I believe. So, do you have a favourite Golden Age book or writer?
Yeah, it's got to be Agatha Christie. Not sure about which book, but I love digging that. I think the thing with her is, though, that there are so many television interpretations of her work. It's almost like you visage a Poirot. Is it Peter Ustinov? Is it Suchet? That sort of stuff. And I find that very hard to divorce my image of the character from those depictions. It actually brings me on to something that I was going to mention, which is newly launched in the UK, BritBox from ITV and BBC, which is this receptacle paced stream service. I've just subscribed to it, and it is absolutely stock full of all the things that we've mentioned: Midsummer Murders, Happy Valley, all sorts of the classic crime. It's got all of the Colin Dexter work. So we've got Morse, Endeavour, and Lewis all together. It is quite extraordinary, and all the Poirots you could possibly want, all the Sherlock Holmes adaptations you could ever want. It is absolutely stock full of it. In fact, I think that's probably sort of 70% of the content on there is going to be in the crime genre. So an opportunity to watch stuff that, with nostalgia, and also some really good classic British films that they've put together on there. Starring, they've got their own collection of Michael Caine classics, which always I find fun. The trouble is, I always find that I'm slipping it to Michael all the time when I listen to him speaking. I can't help it. I get a bit nasal and a bit angry sometimes. So it's good fun. It's good fun. It's. I think for a lot of these things are available elsewhere on Netflix, Amazon, that sort of stuff, but it's pretty well curated. I am impressed.
And lots of good old British comedy as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And some of the stuff that hasn't appeared on other services yet. So some of the sort of sketch shows of the 90s and 2000s have appeared. The Mitchell and Webb look, for instance, that's available, which I love. But then if you go way back, Only Fools and Horses is there. Naturally, Dad's Army turns up. I actually was watching something very fun the other day. I found on YouTube, This Is Your Life, Arnold Ridley, who played Godber in Godfrey in not Godber. That's a different series altogether. Godfrey.
That's porridge.
And and he was playwright of the golden age as a man, Arnold Ridley. That's who I'm thinking of. He wrote Ghost Train.
Ghost Train.
And many other great plays which sometimes get revivals. And he's also the great grandfather of Daisy Ridley from the Star Wars current films. I'm not sure they ever met, but it was a fascinating thing to see the cast of Dad's Army, and then all these great old thespians and people that he'd worked with back in the 20s he hadn't seen for 50 odd years turning up. People he'd fought wars with. He fought in both wars. He was an extraordinary character. Wow. And I just love things like that, those sort of time capsules. You forget at the time something like This Is Your Life could be a little bit twee and a little bit, but actually when you look back 20 years on, just fascinating to watch the dynamics. There's one from the States which has got Laurel and Hardy getting This Is Your Life, and it was just before I think Oliver Hardy died, and all the ex-wives turning up and all this sort of thing, and the people who did them down in Hollywood being invited onto the show. It was very, very strange. Wow. So it's worth looking at on YouTube for that sort of thing. You see the dynamics once you know the stories that have come out subsequently in biographies. You can see the eyes narrowing as so and so comes through and gives their homily.
Yeah, well, don't send me down the YouTube rabbit hole, Adrian. I'll be there all day and I won't be getting any work done. On which note, we should probably both do just that. I think I'll have to double check the schedule. I think you might be back with us next week, whether you like it or not.
I'm always around.
Yeah, good. I know once he gets into December, things sort of ease up a little bit over Christmas. So Mr. Dawes' dulcet tones will return. And if you are around any of the areas where his production of 10 Times Table is touring with Bill Kenwright production, do go and see that. It's getting some great reviews. Well, thank you very much, Adrian. I think we'll speak to you next week. I'm off to get some more work done, and have a great week. Get lots of reading done, get lots of news researched, and we'll do it all over again.
Lovely.
Partners in Crime was presented by Adam Croft.
Not the other one.
Produced by Adam Croft. The theme tune was by the Caesareans. The Partners in Crime logo and imagery were designed by Stuart Beisch. Partners in Crime is sponsored by Kobo, your favourite local bookshop, perfected.